All right, radio communications. Standardized procedures and phraseology are key to safe flying. Today, we're going to be going over the selection and use of appropriate frequencies, or the pre-flight planning, procedures and phraseology, and ATC clearances and instructions. All right, so the selection of your frequencies, you should have a good idea of what frequencies you're going to be using before you start the flight. So 91.103 talks about pre-flight action. Each pilot in command shall, before beginning a flight, become familiar with all available information concerning that flight. So always plan ahead with regard to any frequencies needed. You can look them up using the chart supplement, the sectional charts, or ForeFlight. I use ForeFlight a lot. If you have a nav log, make sure to write them down in the nav log. Here's a picture of one of Purdue's nav logs, and this section down here that's circled is where you would write down all of your frequencies. You want to get your ATIS, your ground, tower, departure frequency. Some airports have a different departure and approach, so you want to make sure you're aware of that and write those down. It's a good idea to write down your flight service frequencies that can be found on the sectional, and also nearby VOR in case you need to use those on your flight. If you don't have a nav log, so if you're not going on cross country, it can also be a good idea just to write them down on your notepad. You can write them down in the scratch pads in ForeFlight. Just make sure that they're easily accessible so you don't have to go digging for them while you're trying to do other things during the flight. Here's an example of what they look like in the chart supplement. I also have a link here. Maybe not. All right, well, to find it in the chart supplement, you can either use a paper chart supplement, or you can go to the FAA website like this. Click on this first link. Scroll down, and since we are in Indiana, we'd use the East Central. It says EC. Click on that one, and it'll give you a up-to-date PDF of the chart supplement. And we'll go over how to find each airport later in this lesson. All right, and you can also find frequencies on the sectional charts. So here's an example of this airport, Princeton Airport. And right here where it says 122.725 and then has the C, that's the control tower frequency. And here's where to find the VOR frequencies. It's going to be in this box next to the VOR. And yeah, so this 122.9, that's the VOR frequency. You can tune that in. All right, so once you're in contact with the controllers, they will provide you with the next frequencies to reach the next controller. Read back the frequencies when instructed before you change frequencies. All right, so going on to the procedures. Understanding is the most important part of radio communications, so make sure you understand what they have told you before you move on. You can always ask them to repeat it or ask them to clarify what they mean. Acknowledge all radio calls to ATC with your aircraft call sign, and you want to be brief and concise with your radio communications. And we'll go into what's important to read back and what's not important in a minute. All right. So know what you're going to say before you say it. Proper phraseology enhances safety. And here's a link to the glossary and the AIM to understand better what so certain phrases mean. And practice makes perfect, so it can be a good idea to practice your radio calls before saying them to make sure that you're concise with saying it instead of using phrases like when you're starting out. that can be annoying for the controller. So it can also be a good idea to practice your radio calls before the flight. All right. So after you get your instructions, it can be a good idea to write them down while you're getting them so that you can know exactly what you're going to read back. And then after transmitting, wait a few seconds before calling again. The controller might be busy, so if you don't get a response right away, just wait a couple minutes, especially if the frequency is busy. All right, and it's also important to just be alert to the sounds on the frequency or lack of sounds. Make sure to check your frequency and volume regularly. Make sure you don't have a stuck mic, stuff like that. And it's important to make sure you're operating within the range of your equipment to the ground station equipment. Higher altitudes increase the range or the VHF line of sight communications. ATISes are normally within 20 to 60 nautical miles, but this can be different for each airport or different types of ground equipment. So usually call tower within 10 to 20 nautical miles. And you can always just try to see if you can hear the ATIS. It's good. You should be able to hear it within 20 nautical miles. All right, so the 4 W's of radio communication. When you go to call up tower, you want to say tower or ground or flight or flight following. Okay, so the first W is who you're calling. So for example, if you are calling Lafayette Tower, you would say Lafayette Tower, and then who you are, Purdue 57, for example. Where you are, if you're coming inbound, you could say 10 miles northwest of the field and what you want. So in this example, we have Lafayette Tower, Purdue 57 is 10 miles northwest of the field, inbound for a full stop, requesting short approach. So who you're calling, who you are, where you are, and what you want. Those are 4 W's to keep in mind for any radio call. All right, so using your aircraft call sign, don't abbreviate on your initial contact. Wait until tower abbreviates for you. So a lot of times they'll just use the last 3 digits of your call sign, but wait for them to abbreviate before you start abbreviating. And don't abbreviate when there is similar call signs using the same frequency. So for example, at Purdue, there's Purdue 50 and Purdue 60. A lot of times Tower will initiate saying Purdue 50 and Purdue 60 to avoid confusion. And yes, it's just important to recognize if there's a similar call sign using the same frequency so you avoid executing a clearance for another aircraft. And just make sure to ask if you're unsure if they were calling you or somebody else. Another thing to keep in mind is that for us is at Purdue, we can just use Purdue 50, Purdue 57. But if you're going to a different airport, you want to make sure to say the type of aircraft. So we're Piper Archers, so we would say Archer Purdue 50, just so that the other airports know what type of aircraft they're looking for. If you're a Cessna Skyhawk, you would say Skyhawk 48 Alpha, whatever your call sign is. All right, so we also want to use the phonetic alphabet when identifying your aircraft during contact with ATC facilities. Here's a picture of the phonetic alphabet. You want to try to memorize that. So instead of saying T, you say Tango. Instead of using B, you say Bravo. Pretty much at any point when communicating. All right, figures indicating hundreds and thousands in round number. As for ceiling heights, and upper wind levels up to 9,900s should be spoken with the following. So 500, you want to use 500, but through 3,500, you would instead say 3,500. And then above 9,900, you want to separate the digits by, like, instead of saying 13,000, you would say 13,000. All right, and as far as runways, make sure to say, instead of runway like 28 or 15, runway 28 or runway 15, you just want to say the numbers individually. Radio frequencies, for the decimal point, just say point. So for Purdue's frequency 119.6. And then at and above 18,000 feet MSL, we're going to use the words flight level followed by the separate digits of flight level. For reading this, you would just add 2 zeros after it says FL, and then the number. So for 19,000 feet, you would say flight level 190, and then the extra 2 zeros are assumed. Or for 27,500, you would say flight level 275. Expressing altitudes using words 2 and 4, you need to be careful with this because and you really just don't want to use these words at all. So if you're saying, oh, climbing for 5,000, this can be interpreted as you're climbing to 45,000 feet when instead of 5,000. Or climbing to 5,000. This is going to be interpreted as climbing to 25,000 feet instead of climbing to 5,000 feet. So instead just say climbing 5,000. Just get rid of those words, those filler words altogether. And then, yeah, non-towered airports, an example is inbound to 8. This is going to be interpreted as you're inbound to runway 28. So make sure to say runway in front of which runway you're going to. So instead you would say inbound landing runway 8. All right, and directions are always going to be given in magnetic course. So if it is given in true course, they would say true after the direction. And then as far as time goes, they're always going to give times in UTC, or they'll usually say Zulu afterwards, but if they don't say Zulu, just assume that it's going to be for universal time. If they are going to give you Eastern time or Central time, wherever you are, they'll say local after giving you the time. Here's a chart for figuring out universal time to your local time. So we're in Eastern, so we would just add 5 hours. So if they said that it was 1900 Zulu time, that would actually be 1400 Eastern time, so 2 p.m. All right, ATC clearances and instructions. So acknowledge all ATC clearances by repeating the key points followed by your call sign. You must read back all hold short instructions. So a lot of times, the ATIS will even say this because it's very important. In this example, we have Skyhawk 9 Whiskey Romeo, 9er Whiskey Romeo, runway 34, taxi via Hotel Foxtrot Echo, hold short runway 24. And so for this, you would read back pretty much everything. If you're in any confusion, just read back everything they give you. So runway 34, taxi via Hotel Foxtrot Echo, hold short runway 24, and then repeat back your call sign. So in this example, it's Skyhawk 9er Whiskey Romeo. And then yes, make sure you read back all clearances. So if they say cleared to runway 28, they're like Purdue 57 cleared to runway 28, cleared to land. You would say cleared to land runway 28, Purdue 57. So pretty much just read back what their clearance they give you, if you're talking to a tower, and then give your call sign. Always repeat altitudes, headings, and altimeters. So pretty much any numbers you're given, you're gonna want to read back. But you don't necessarily need to read back the airport that they're giving you. So in this example, it says, approach is saying Skyhawk 54 uniform, maintain VFR at or below 4,500, Newark, altimeter 3014. So in this, you're gonna repeat back all of the numbers, but you don't necessarily need to say like Newark. So you would say maintain VFR at or below 4,500, altimeter 3014, Skyhawk 54 uniform. When advising to change frequencies, acknowledge the instruction and change as soon as possible. So if they say, Skyhawk 8 Mike Charlie, contact New York approach at 128.55, all you would have to say is 128.55 Skyhawk 8 Mike Charlie. So, yeah, you want to be clear and concise, but you want to make sure you read back all the important information so that they know that you got it. So yeah, if they're telling you to change frequencies, make sure you read that back before changing frequencies. Otherwise, they might think that you have a radio failure, or they might not know if you that you acknowledged the change in frequency. And this just creates a higher workload for the controller. All right, if a clearance or instruction is blocked or not understood, you can just say again. Don't guess or ignore the call, just ask them to repeat themselves. And once you've accepted an ATC clearance, you cannot deviate it from it unless it is an emergency situation. And this is 91.123. But if you cannot accept a clearance, just advise ATC on the reason and you can obtain a new clearance. Don't accept any clearance for which you are unable to perform. So if you're talking to flight following and they tell you to deviate 10 miles from the airport, something like that, and you don't have enough fuel, just let ATC know that you are short on fuel and they'll give you a different clearance to accommodate that. All right, and here's just an example of starting out a flight. So here's just a link to get that CHARP supplement again. So when you're starting a cross country, just go to that chart supplement, get all your frequencies, write them down on your knee board, iPad, taxiway diagram. And then this is how I would set up your radios starting out a flight. So in COM 1, we've got the active is 121.9 and the standby is 119.6. This is going to be Lafayette ground and Lafayette tower. And then in COM 2, we've got 127.5. This is the ATIS, and 123.85, and this is in the standby, and that's Grissom approach. So you just want to make sure before taxiing that you've got all your radios in, and this is on the Purdue checklist as well. So you should be doing that. And then this is just an example of how to call up ground for starting a cross-country flight. So this is something that I personally would practice before even getting into the plane. So if you're going to Indianapolis, for example, this one is Lafayette ground, Purdue 57 is at Hangar 6 West with information Bravo, ready to taxi and requesting VFR flight following to Kilo India November Delta at 5,500. So when you're requesting flight following, make sure that you give your altitude, or else I'll just ask you. And then here's some additional resources. AIM Chapter 4, Section 2. It's on radio communications. Here's some more information on non-towered airport flight operations. And yep. Any questions? Great.